Hi, everybody. My name is Charity. I am the executive assistant with Host to Host. So you probably get a lot of communications and outreach from me. Probably it's great to put faces to names. I see a lot of your names periodically. So thanks for joining us tonight, where we're going to talk about picture perfect tips for your taking the best photographs you can for your short-term rental. And we want to empower you with just some guidelines and tips, some knowledge to help you improve your listings. And just as a quick reminder, there's a couple of points of order to kind of include, which is tonight we're going to begin sort of a little more formally with sort of an agenda, so some things that we really want to convey with you that we've been brainstorming on to try to bring you some really useful information. So I would ask you to kind of input your questions as they come up. You're welcome to drop them into the chat if you're comfortable doing that, or just wait until we kind of get through our presentation and we get to invite you to ask your questions at that time, and then we'll kind of dig into those a bit more. I'm going to still be admitting folks into the waiting room as the time goes on, so expect more faces to pop up. But Joel asked a really good question, which was, who is our speakers today? Well, we've got a really great panel today, including Carlos Camarena. Raise your hand, thank you. And Carlos is a longtime host-to-host member. He is a photographer who has taken shots, some of the best shots that our members have had in their spaces over the years, and is always helping out. He is a member of our community committee as well, and even our education committee. So he offers a lot of great insights to our organization. So thank you, Carlos, appreciate that. Also on the panel, we have Amina Moreau with Radius, and also a business affiliate. So you can find more information about her in our member directory. She is the founder of Radius. Radius makes flexible spaces for businesses and helps hosts generate alternative revenue for spaces when they're not being used during the day. So it's a pretty cool take on ways to basically put your rental space to work in different ways. And she'll tell us a little bit more about that. She is a professionally trained photographer, so she has a background and skill set in that as well, and really wants to share with you some tips and some ideas that'll help improve your photography. Lastly, we have Jared Whitney, and if you raise your hand. Jared joins us with experience in a variety of different photography subjects, and has been specializing more recently in real estate and short-term rental photography, has helped several of our hosts take some awesome photos, and he's going to be sharing some of his insights as well as we go on. So thank you to our panel, first of all. Many thanks. Let's see, sorry, still letting a few more people in. While they're still trickling in, why don't we turn it over to Carlos, who's got some interesting sort of queries for you folks to get us started. Carlos?
Hey folks, one of the things that we wanted to kind of tackle today was to encourage folks to explore DIY photography. So in addition to kind of sharing our tips about our experiences as professionals, there's definitely occasions where it makes sense to approach doing photos on your own. And we wanted to kind of tackle some situations, at least in my experience, and then Jared will share some as well, where, I'm going to share my screen in just a moment. I'm going to share a series of photos where I have strategically mixed in photos that I've taken with my phone, and from the same shoot, I've mixed in photos that I've delivered to a client from my professional camera. And I'm kind of curious from your take, because keep in mind, we're on Zoom, or on mobile, and that's where a lot of our guests are typically viewing their listings, is either on mobile and on a relatively small screen on a laptop. So I'm going to be curious if you guys, I'm going to go through about 5 photos and see if you guys can pick out which ones were from a phone from the same shoot and which ones may have been from delivered from a professional camera. So I'm going to go ahead and set up the screen share here in just a moment. And then we'll dive into some details as to why they may have looked so similar. Let me hit the screen share, and I'm going to hit desktop and hit share. All right, can we see everyone now?
Ooh,
Are we seeing the screen?
Yes.
yes.
Okay, excellent. So here's the first shot, and I'm just going to go through these fairly quickly. This is all the same space. This is an ADU that was out in Portland. Hopefully the top isn't cut off with this menu bar, not too much. So here's photo 1, 2, 3, and a couple more here. And I'm going to be curious as we go through. There's only 2 side-by-side examples that I'll point out here in a moment. But as you're looking through these, I'm curious if anyone has already, and you could probably, let's see if we can maybe use either the raised hands, or I'll try to turn on the cameras here to see if I can view the whole grid of folks. If you've already noticed which ones may have been from a phone, or if you're paying acute attention, there might be a dead giveaway somewhere on the screen. But this is all the same space. This is the last photo in the set. So as I kind of go through that image set, anyone have any ideas of which ones do any of those stick out as phone photos by chance? Anyone want to raise their hand or see if they can pick the Where's Waldo? Hey, is it Peg or Peggy?
It's just Peg. I'm
Peg?
thinking the ones that are vertical and narrow, whereas the others are horizontal and more fuller rectangle.
That's a good thought. That's a good way to give it. Yeah. And then I saw Joel, I think I saw your hand as well.
Same thing.
Okay. So the vertical orientation, it seems like may have been one giveaway. I think that's one insight. Does it look, in your opinion, for anyone who's looking at these, even if you take into account the vertical, does it look like they at least fit in a cohesive set? Is that fair to think that they would look okay together if they were to be in a listing?
Yeah.
Okay, so you are correct on the vertical ones. The vertical ones are in fact all from the phone. There are some horizontal ones that are from a camera. And the reason I want to and I'm glad you pointed out the vertical, is they do still blend in a cohesive set. And I actually, while I was photographing this with the host, I encouraged them, like, hey, I'm on my phone. You have a recent smartphone. You can accomplish this as well. If you change something in the kitchen, change something in the living room, you have plenty of natural light. This is actually horizontal from the phone. That she did include in her listing. She didn't ask or care that I took it on my phone. It was just an extra shot that I had on my phone, but it blended in still well with the rest of the set. So this is a space that I really encourage her to say, hey, you have a lot of natural light. If you change something that doesn't merit me coming back, or small things that you want to photograph, absolutely venture to take your own photos, because you can tell that any photo that I would take, short of maybe some composition tips, could actually blend in really, really well. The 2 ones that are actually strikingly similar, almost from the same spot, I'm going to minimize this real quick, are these 2. And I'm going to show them side by side and see how strikingly similar they are. So between these 2 images, maybe it's just me, but I can't really tell. Like, if it was in a photo set, I probably couldn't tell which one is the phone, which one is the camera. Do we think we could agree?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There is so much natural light in this space. This particular shot is the phone. This one is the camera.
Wow.
Phone, camera. And as I'm working with the host, I'm telling her, your space has so much natural light. You're so close to what a camera can produce. You could totally tackle this if you wanted to take updated photos. If you change the couch, if you change some blankets, if you change some pillows, just try to recreate the angle. If you like the angle, change it up. Here's a shot that you can make. And I gave her both. And it was hilarious to me that, and I love that it blended in so well. And so that's one of those things that I think is a space that, and I want to show kind of the window side. Spaces that lend really well to smartphone photography is especially when you have a lot of natural light. So if you see the skylights, you see these French doors, these big windows here. This space has a lot of natural light that's cascading across the space. That's where, if you have windows, if you have shades that you can open up, take those shots, open things up, and certainly venture to take your own photos with your phone. Phones do a really, really great job, even on interiors. Historically, smartphones really struggle with inside, but if your interiors happen to have a lot of natural light, you should absolutely be willing to tackle it. Should absolutely be willing to give it a shot. The other things that you might notice, Peg, you mentioned the vertical photos. We're so used to seeing on our devices in a vertical orientation. Um, Maybe other photographers, Jared and Amina, can kind of speak to this. I'm used to seeing things horizontally. So what you experience on your phone vertically, maybe something different than I would naturally see horizontally through my camera. Obviously, we'll deliver vertical photos as well, but you experience your space more often as you walk around more vertically. It's actually ironically more challenging to encourage hosts to turn their phone horizontally to take horizontal photos, because it's so much more natural for us to take vertical photos with our phones. So for sake of variety, especially if you have a lot of natural light, the only thing that I always encourage hosts to do is be mindful of vertical lines in your photos. I'm sure Amina and Jared will touch on this in the perspective section. When you're taking photos on your phone, I have another example. Here's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid looking down on a room. We're trying to avoid the weird vertical lines that come very skewed, that make a room look small. And sometimes that just comes from our perspective looking down on a space. And that can really change if compared to if we kind of get down a little bit lower in a different spot of the room to really showcase, the size of the room instead of looking kind of down on the floor. So for DIY reasons, if you have a lot of natural light, be mindful of your angles, and really encourage you guys to explore that, because as I showed you, these two photos, this is the phone and this is the camera, and they're pretty darn close in my opinion. So that's my little bit on the DIY. We'll continue to touch a little bit more, but
Yeah.
I'm going to pass it on back to Charity real quick.
No, thank you. That was really interesting. I was really trying to guess between those two photos, which was,
Yeah,
professional.
and that was a recent shoot that I wanted to showcase this. I was like, this is fascinating to me because client doesn't necessarily know, and most folks don't really care. It's just as long as it looks high quality, and that's where phones tend to shine when there's plenty of light.
Yeah, it's interesting to me because certain in this image, certain kind of colors pop a little bit more on the phone, and the one with the professional camera seems to give more light further back in the space, and
Sure.
so it's just interesting how those
Small nuances, right? But they could still belong in the set together as you kind of go through the whole set.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for touching on that. And that's a really pretty space too, by the way. I love all the natural.
Yeah, I really like this ADU.
Yeah, it's pretty.
I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. I'm gonna pass it back to Charity.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and I am actually going to ask Amina to tell us a little bit more about some of the things that Carlos kind of briefly touched on, but how important it is to get the right perspective when you're taking photos.
Yeah, it's huge. And I'm going to touch on two things that Carlos said. One having to do with those vertical lines that he showed some examples of, but also touching on what he said about shooting horizontal images. Part of the reason that it really makes sense to flip that phone over into horizontal mode is because most of the short-term rental platforms out there, like Airbnb, VRBO Radius, they actually default to displaying your photos in a horizontal format. So if you shoot a vertical photo and then upload it to Airbnb, it'll actually crop it until you go into the gallery view, and then it shows the big one. But if you're showing it as one of your first 5, it's actually going to crop. And I don't think that Airbnb even lets you choose how it crops. It just automatically crops to the center of the image, which may not actually have the most pertinent information. And so it's generally good practice if a platform is displaying things horizontally to then shoot in a horizontal format. So it's displaying it as close to the way that you intended for it to show up as possible. So but I will also share my screen to highlight this perspective argument that Carlos is making just a little bit more deeply. So what you're looking at here is a video I made a couple of years ago when I was photographing a space. Basically, this is a dining room it's being marketed as a meeting space, which is why you see a laptop on it, and there's a whiteboard here because guests that book through Radius are booking environments like this to meet versus to eat. And so I made this video to help people who are DIYing their photography understand the lines a little bit. And I won't show you the whole video. Actually, if you want to see the whole video, I have a blog post here that I'll share in the chat. And so you can read it. It has 7 tips for how to photograph your space. And one of the tips has to do with perspective, tips number 7. And that's the video down there. But basically, when Carlos was saying that like, if you look down at a room, your lines are going to sort of go in a V shape. When he said looking down, it's really just at normal standing height. Because, your typical room and like, or even your typical couch or table, because most of us are of a certain height, we're typically looking down on furniture, down on tables and chairs, etc. And that's what causes this sort of V shape of the lines. Now, let me scrub through this video and you're actually going to see me crouch down in real time. Actually, let me actually press play on it. It'll probably be smoother. So you can actually see me crouch down just a little bit lower and see how all of those lines now straighten out. And it's a relatively small difference. Now you're going to be working your quads. You might, if you're photographing a whole house, you're going to feel the burn a little bit. But you don't have to crouch down too far. And I mean, you're probably all sitting for a Zoom call right now. Look around the room. At the height that you're at now, all of your lines, all of your vertical lines are probably roughly all parallel to each other. So it's not like you need to squat all the way down to the floor. You kind of want to be halfway between the floor and the ceiling, depending on how high the ceiling is, of course. So, and I'll show you another example of this in a static image. So here is a living room where, again, you can see how this door is kind of on an angle, but then on the opposite side of the image, it's coming in on another angle. And so it's going in a V. And it's not a bad photo. It certainly shows what the room feels like and what it's capable of. It looks pretty comfortable. But you just make that one change, and all of a sudden, that very same room feels more professionally photographed. It's such a small thing. Any questions about this before I move forward? Okay. The last thing that I wanted to say is that, kind of coming back to that first image that I was showing you with the dining room setup. And I think we might come back to this a little bit later in the webinar, but you're also going to want to think about staging and who your target audience is. If this is a vacation rental, if this is for nurses that are traveling, if it's for working professionals looking to get some work done. So for example, in the radius context, you wouldn't want to have the dining room set with plates and wine glasses the way that you might want it staged for Airbnb. For a radius listing, you would probably want to clear your table of all of that and put a laptop down or some notebooks with pens and make it clear that your space is there to be used for things like meetings or having people come in to work together if they don't have an office to go to. So staging is a big one. But again, look at the lines on this image, right? All of these lines are parallel. And because of that, it feels like a more professionally shot image. The one other thing that I'll add, and this will probably segue into our next speaker, is the windows. Carlos was talking about how the more natural light there is, the better your phone is going to perform. The one caveat to that, though, is that if you're shooting into the direction of windows, your phone is not going to handle the windows quite as well as a professional camera. And here's an example of that. So here's this image again. See how these windows, you can't really see the detail? There's like, it's white and it's blown out and you can't really see what's in the front yard. And that's because it was shot on a camera that can't handle windows quite as well, even though there's a lot of natural light happening in that room. But we can get into these details a little bit more. I think that we have a whole section on lighting, so I'll just leave it at that for now. And yeah, I will drop the link to this blog post about photographing your space DIY. So look out for that in a moment.
Thanks, Amina. I'll also be including the link to Amina's blog in the follow-up when the videos out there. So in case you missed something, you want to re-review it, that's something that'll be available to you folks hopefully tomorrow. So for the last section, at least for this first part of our conversation, I'd like to take it over to Jared, who is going to help us understand some differences in staging approaches and some of that. So go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Yeah, that was all really good stuff. If I could, before we even move on, like I was just thinking about, Amina, how you were talking about those lines. It really makes all the difference when that shot has those nice vertical lines everywhere compared to looking down. That's probably one of the markers, if not the marker, between kind of taking it a step further to look that much more professional and that much more intentional. That's probably one of the, if you take anything today, that's probably one of the top 3, if not the very top one. So well done talking about that. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about staging, really just kind of talking about when you are photographing your spaces, just considering what the space looks like, what you're including, what you're not including. And to start, I think it all starts with kind of the story that you're wanting to tell. Like, what is the place that you are featuring? As Amina was talking about, the fact that a lot of these places are, they are on there to show that they're used for business and things like that. It's a very intentional thing to consider what's on the table, or are the blankets out on the couches compared to whether or not everything's looking a little bit more like a meeting space where work is going to happen. We're not going to cozy up and settle down for a Netflix binge. We're here to do business. And so when it comes to the staging, it's all about the story that you're trying to tell. And so let me, it's been a minute since I've shared my screen, but it's 2024 and you've got it. So can everybody see my screen there?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So yeah, I'll kind of go through kind of a couple points and then kind of show some examples. But I think just as we were kind of talking about lighting, we're going to talk about lighting more. I believe Carlos has that. I think that's a great start when you're wanting to show off your space and you're taking these photos, considering lighting and deciding on the environment if there's great natural light versus if the lighting will be sufficient or add to it, just to make sure that things are consistent, and really capitalizing on whether or not the space really shines just with natural light versus shining, like if it looks really good with the lighting versus wanting to feature all the natural light that might be flowing into a space. I'd say most of the time, especially the style of photography that we would use as professionals with our gear, we're probably leaning on most spaces having lights on, but really just considering what that looks like, kind of depending on the space. When it comes to staging and objects and what's featured, again, this really comes down to the space itself. If your space that you're featuring on Airbnb, for example, is maybe more of like a cottage vibe, there are more knickknacky things that kind of make the space what it is, or contribute to the experience, then having more things, featured on shelves and whatnot might make more sense. As opposed to, for example, this spot that I have, this is from several years ago. This is an Airbnb that was unfortunately a COVID casualty. but it no longer is around. But this was, if I can, these are the first shots. I then went outside. This is a little bit before I followed some general rules, but for perspective, this is the home. It's a very like minimal, it's a very mid-century modern in the West Hills, lots of wooded features around it. And the inside is also going to be reflecting that. And so automatically right away, like with some of these modern straight lines, I could already tell getting into the home that it was going to have more of a modern minimalist vibe while still having a little bit of a cozy edge. So the place that had the most features in this space was probably in this great living room. But you can see that everything is very well intentioned and that everything feels fairly appropriate. It doesn't feel too over the top, and it's adding a little bit of soft textures to, I personally love mid-century modern, but sometimes it can come off a little harsh. And so by adding features such as like, this soft, I don't even know what you call that. Like, if anybody knows, shout it out. I think you get them from IKEA just to kind of lay over a hard surface to kind of add a little soft texture. But just really thinking overall, what is this space and what am I trying to convey? It's all about telling a story for that space. I know that a lot of Airbnb folks are there we go. Something just went over. There we go. I know a lot of folks with Airbnbs, you feature, there are a lot of maybe instructions on certain things that might be displayed. And I think for the sake of photography, for the most part, I think unless it's like permanently affixed to a wall, like a little instruction, here's how you use the thermostat, I think it's great to remove those things for photos. People, when they get there, will get that instruction as they get to your space, but ultimately we want to show them what the space is like as a whole without it looking too cluttered. But like I said, like this space in particular, it was pretty minimal. It didn't have a lot of items, and the fact that there were very few items fit in with the space. I'm going to go to another one. Someone on the call might recognize it. But this is a fun one. This is the Noble Woods Cottage. And this again kind of goes into, as far as staging goes, we removed a lot of the instructions, a lot of the features that showed you how to use those spaces, because your audience or your guests will eventually see those things. I realize I've gone a little long, and so I'm trying to kind of move through this.
Oh, you're okay. Don't worry.
Okay, good.
Yeah, there's no rush. You can keep going, Jared.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. And so I wanted to show, so you might be wondering, like, how much do I show spaces versus how much do I show features? And I really think that's kind of up to you as you know your space. You want to show like the usability and the function. When people are here, what are they doing? And what are the things that they need to know that are going to give them the best experience in your space? And so, for example, you might like, this isn't the focus of this photo, but if I had decided to take a photo of just these flowers, they're pretty. Like if I zoomed in and I got right up, I don't have an example, but like if I got right up on those flowers, those are cool, but they don't necessarily tell the story of the space. It's something that somebody will experience and see, but it's not telling the story about what their overall experience is when they're in this Airbnb. However, in this really cool kitchen, one of the things that we want to highlight, even though you can see, many different features on this small kitchen, I really want to make a point of highlighting, oh, look at that. It's open shelving, it's modern subway tile, and here's everything that you need. This place is made for eating and dining and hanging out and being together. You can see like the different, you got the wine glasses versus the whiskey glasses versus the beer glasses. It's saying we have you covered in this space. Another thing that might have, now I'm thinking about it, another thing that would have been good to feature in this space is The fridge was fairly stocked with various beverages. That would be another good feature. Something to show in the space that shows that functionality, shows like this is what you can experience or expect when you're in this space. And so, yeah, I mean, the moral of the story is like, tell the story. I think less is more in the sense of what you're presenting in your space. You know, whether or not you set the table to, you know, have, you know, dishes and dining. If that helps tell the story, or that's a really main feature of maybe a great, beautiful living or dining room, then set the table. Also, dining room table and chairs can be pretty intuitive at the same time. The way I kind of look at it is, if it looks cluttered, it might be. If it looks busy, it might be. Or in my case, it probably is. I'm kind of that way. And so a lot of it is using your judgment, but just considering, you know, what's the story that you want to tell? Keep the main thing, and to tell the story of your space through styling. And so I think that's kind of all I have at this moment. The one thing that I just remembered is, if there's like a piece of functionality, something that maybe someone would miss, that's always a good thing to highlight. So for example, in this Airbnb, there's a desk for working. It's folded up on the side because it's a smart use of space. But we want to show a photo that shows, hey, this is also what this could be used for. These particular hosts have, they tend to have a lot of longer term stays. People are in town for work or visiting family while still working, or even people that come, you know, they live out of Airbnbs and they travel all the time. And it's just great to show like, hey, when you're here, you can still get work done. It's a very functional space. And so I hope that I hit on everything we needed to hit, but I'm going to leave it at that.
Thanks, Jared. All beautiful spaces too, by the way. And you really drilled home to me, especially this idea of telling the story of the space and kind of building that story with your photos and with your staging and all of that. And as Carlos mentioned in the chat, it's also a good idea to be present with your photographer so that you can help them tell the story. You know the space better than they do. You can key them into some of the things that you would like to have highlighted. Like I can see this coffee table that lifts up. Oh, love those things. And there you have, you know, another feature that a photographer who is just entering the space might not know about, right? I love those. So yeah, no, that's really good. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so our last sort of key point that we want to highlight before we kind of break out into more of a panel discussion is Carlos is going to give us some more perspective on lighting and how that can be your best friend or not, and what to do there.
Yeah. So Amina had touched on, first of all, Jared, thank you so much for sharing all those insights, because I'm sure like Amina and I were like nodding our heads throughout that, like, yes, 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 that's exactly it. So we're excited that you could show examples of exactly that. And then Charity, as soon as you mentioned the lift up coffee table and then Jared was showing that, I'm like, that's one of those unobvious amenities that if you don't invite via a photo, if you don't invite a guest to open that, they may not. And then they go away thinking, well, I didn't even know that was there. I wish I would have known there was games or there was a remote control thing. And the other thing that I'll mention, with a lot of the features and things that Jared is mentioning that he's photographing in those spaces, those are questions that you don't have to answer because you showed it in a photo. Like you're making your job easier as a host by showing them, if you open this, here's what's here. If you open that, here's what's there. Here's an alternative way to use the space. And by you yourselves or a photographer being a little bit nosy and kind of doing the unobvious things, like I'm always apologizing to people almost first thing when I walk to their home, like I'm going to be a little nosy because I need to know what's behind all these things, because you as the host may have forgotten that you offer something that's been tucked away or hasn't been used as often, but someone may find it valuable. So thank you, Jared, for showing those details, because that's really helpful to hopefully alleviate a host job. Like that could be one less question, one less inquiry that you have to answer, and could improve your hosting experience, whether working with a pro or taking your own photos. So something to keep in mind. That's so awesome. Thank you both, Amina and Jared, for sharing those things. And that animation, Amina, you had with the I think your file name had lightsabers which I think was a really cool file name for
For
that
any
demonstration.
DIY photography, you must have lightsabers.
Lightsabers.
That is the takeaway. If there's anything you come away from today, it's lightsabers.
Awesome, awesome. So I want to kind of touch on a couple of things that both Jared and Amina had mentioned in when what they were sharing. One of the things that Amina had mentioned, and I have a couple of example photos, is where phones really tend to struggle. If you're approaching a DIY situation and you're going to open up the shades, the windows, turn on the interior lights. One of the situations where a phone may struggle is if you're looking directly into a window or looking into a light source. Phones tend to struggle in balancing how to create a proper exposure for that. Your phones may have like an HDR mode, and if that doesn't sound familiar, Google your phone model plus the term HDR. You may have a setting in your phone that may help conquer those challenges of really contrasting situations between sources of light. So, type in iPhone 15 or iPhone 12 or Galaxy 27, whatever model we're on now. Type in your phone model in Google plus the three letters HDR, and see if your phone has that setting in there. You might actually be able to conquer that better than a phone that may not have that setting. So that's one tip you can maybe kind of hopefully walk away with. I'm going to share my screen in a moment. And these are examples where it might, I don't want to like oversell like our like professional photographers, but these are like unique lighting situations that are like looking into a light source where it might be beneficial to work with a professional if this is common in your space. Let me share desktop. Okay, we're looking at my screen right now, hopefully. And then here's the two. Okay, so here's a kitchen. This is from my phone, right? And in and of itself, if a host has their lines vertical and this is the photo you post, it's okay. I think this is actually perfectly fine to post. I probably should have remembered to turn on the lights. I'm noticing that they're off right now. So if you're looking at a very contrasting situation, you have a light source that your phone is looking into, turn on any interior light so you can kind of help your phone balance the exposure inside the room. So I show you this to show you the next shot. It's not like the most glamorous kitchen, but it at least shows the example of the lighting situation that could be beneficial to have a photographer come and work with you, whoever you choose. Here's what a lit shot might look like. Vastly different, right? We can see some of the shadows are illuminated. We're no longer working with a lot of color cast as much. This is one of those challenges that a phone just can't tackle. Whether a photographer is using supplemental lighting or using an HDR technique where they're using multiple exposures. Jared, I think you're probably more familiar with me. I don't use the HDR as much, but Jared, is this a situation where you would use like multiple exposures to blend with an HDR method?
Go back to the original one. Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of real estate photography, which, I mean, a lot of it is the same, but yeah, using bracketed photos, I mean, we'd effectively recreate the HDR effect in order to, highlight the darks and, calm down the outside brights
highlights.
And then masks all those together.
Right.
And HDR, for those wondering, I don't know. So I had to think about it.
Yes.
But it's high
dynamic
range, which basically is a fancy way of saying that it's like, it's taking the darks, the mids, and the brights and kind of blending it into a composite image that allows you to get more detail and tone down shadows and tone down, boost shadows and tone down highlights.
Tone down the brights. Yep, exactly. So that's one example. Another from the same space, actually. Again, this is from a phone. We're looking into a source of light, the window. The light is obviously kind of blown out. You can't really tell what's outside. Again, this would be fine. If your space looks like this and you have you're looking into windows, I think you'd be fine. Again, just be mindful of your vertical lines. Get a little bit lower, like Amina suggested as well, so you can kind of line things up. This would be okay. Can we all agree that you wouldn't be offended if you saw this on a listing, right? This would be perfectly acceptable in my opinion.
This looks great.
If we had, this is for my camera using a little bit of some light blending. Okay. Is it drastically different? Subjective, but aesthetically, I much prefer this. I'm biased. I'm the pro. So I absolutely know that I'm biased in saying which one I prefer. But all in all, very similar shot. Really, the difference is like you can see out the windows. You can kind of get the sense of what the view is going to be out there. And it's a little bit more balanced and the colors are a little bit more accurate from the camera rather than from a phone. Do those two photos those two examples share a little bit of insight of when it might be difficult to do it with a phone, when it might be appropriate to bring in a professional? Does that maybe help dispel? Hopefully, I see a couple of head nods. Okay, solid. The last thing I'm going to share, and every photographer is a little bit different, but I do want to share a couple of layers. I'm going to show you our own spare bedroom in my home. This is, again, a photo that I think would be okay to post online. This is, iPhone 15, a recent smartphone that has a wide angle setting. The other thing you can look at on your phone is you may have whether a zoom in or zoom out. A lot of people don't necessarily realize, oh, what is this weird effect going on? I triggered like a zoom effect. Do you guys see that?
Mhm.
That was like a like a fireworks show. That
Yeah.
was interesting.
You're magical, Carlos. That's
That
just
was interesting. I don't know how to do that again. Hopefully I don't. But consider zooming out. If you have small rooms or a tight space, sometimes you don't realize that if you touch the zoom function on your phone, you can zoom in, but you may also be able to zoom out. I know on the iPhones for a while, it hasn't been super obvious that yes, you can zoom in, but a lot of folks don't realize you can also zoom out from the standard zoom that is on your phone. So something you can explore in case that's available and you haven't realized it. So this is the wide angle function on the iPhone. Again, perfectly okay to post, in my opinion, if this is what you were working with. Again, I have a light source in that window. It's not super bright. The next shot is straight from camera. This is something that we could tackle with just one image from a professional camera. You notice that even the camera is still struggling with getting that window properly exposed, right? The next one that I'll show you is what I use. I tend to use flash. So when I take all my photos, I do an ambient shot with just all the natural light. I use a flash as an intermediate layer, and then I blend them together. And the reason I do that, and why several photographers do this, and this can be used with color correction as well. This is not the only way to produce this, but remember how in this iPhone photo, we get some like green hues, we get some warm, not quite color accurate. You can't tell that back wall is actually a tint of blue, not green. I don't know how it looks on your screens. That's another thing that phones may struggle with is color accuracy. It may not be super important to you. It may be just fine. That's okay. But for those who are discerning, or those if you have a space with challenging lighting, color accuracy, if it's important to you, can really benefit from having a professional work with you. Again, this is straight from the camera by itself with no additional lighting. This is with a flash, and then this is blended. What I want to point out is that the walls look white, the blues look blue, the back wall isn't green, the walls aren't tinted green. And what's happening with the iPhone is the iPhones are interpreting, see how the outside has a bunch of greenery, a bunch of foliage? That's like blending into the inside walls. So that's bleeding in, and that's what the iPhone is interpreting. The walls aren't quite white. It's actually trying to compensate on the inside. So what we end up doing is we end up combining, much like Jared said, we combine multiple layers, and we bring to you to a final photo that still looks like it has natural light, but much more color accurate. So that's just some perspective on some lighting options that happen across different mediums between phone and camera and natural light and so on and so forth. So hopefully that wasn't super overwhelming. I know we didn't get to answer questions, but Charity, do you want to answer questions at the end, or should we kind of add that in between? Or
Yeah, no, we were going to definitely get to some questions here.
Okay.
And we can go ahead and release that. So I know Joel had a question about whether or not you should include captions on your photos that I would assume he's mentioning are going to be posted onto your listing, whether it's VRBO, Airbnb, that kind of thing. Do you have any comments about that as a descriptor, or?
Question, just this question having caption. Like, yeah, I was gonna say, Joel, do you want to clarify your question a little bit more? Where did you move on the screen? There you are.
We have some places in our cabin that are pretty obvious, and I think they're really boring. I mean, they're pretty,
Okay.
but it's just, here's a bed, here's a table. I'm a fairly competent writer. I like putting in cute and clever little phrases that I think are fun, but don't detract. However, I'm also aware that what's cute and fun for me may actually not help the potential guest.
I would love to take the first shot at this question, because as a property manager, thank you. As a former property manager, it is key to have captions on your photos for multiple reasons. There's obviously accessibility considerations with that, but also the Google search algorithm does pick up the written word on your photographs. So anything that you can do there, and it could be a space, you're not going to necessarily write, hey, here's a bed, you can sleep in it. It's going to be something like, rest your head after a day of exploring Multnomah Falls and the Oregon coast, and come home to a cozy place to sleep. You're going to make it an inviting, compelling caption on your photo, and you're going to change it up. So you're not going to have the same caption. Even if you have 3 shots of the bedroom, you're going to have different captions on your photos to mix it up, to keep it interesting, to keep somebody searching through your photos for that. So anybody else have thoughts about that?
Jared, were you going to say something?
I think I might eventually, but my thought left me. If you have one, go for it.
Hopefully my thoughts first, yours. So generally when I'm exploring a space, I'm almost in, especially if a host is brand new. If you have a space that you've been hosting for a while, obviously you're going to know how guests interact with your space. If someone's new, like I was working with a new host recently, it's her first time hosting a brand new space. I am often trying to like walk through a space and inquire like, how do you want guests to use this space? Like kind of like what Charity mentioned, like what do you want them to invite? Jared mentioned story, right? And I'm kind of like, well, it might just be a bedroom, but like where do they just come from? Charity mentioned like you just came from adventuring near Multnomah Falls. Is that somewhere nearby? Is there a place that you can feature that you can mention in the caption? I don't know a whole lot of times that I can specifically say that captions made like a world of difference. I'm not a host, full disclosure, not yet. I'm just a photographer, but I haven't had a host come back and say, hey, that caption suggestion like made a world of difference. I know it's helpful, and to Jared's point, it can help portray the story. I don't know a lot of guests that read captions, to be honest with you. So I assume that guests won't, which is why I was mentioning the inquisitiveness of a photographer and a host. Like stage things to be obvious, and the things that aren't obvious, put them right in front in a picture, even if they're not pretty, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think I think it might work best with different features. Like if you want to emphasize maybe a couple of things, like if the fact that you have, say in the kitchen, you have a variety of different tools and appliances for baking. If you wanted your guests to do that, maybe the door's open and like there's a blender, there's a automatic mixer, there's a toaster, there's all these things, and maybe a list of everything that's included in there that might not be seen in that photo can help enhance somebody's understanding of what's available, if that's just a random example. But yeah, overall, the photography, if done really well, should make that obvious. It should be able to tell enough story right away. If you are finding a lot of success through, as Charity mentioned, if search engine optimization is a key part of how you bring clientele in, then by all means, and you're finding success in that, then it could be helpful to let Google know what each photo is, or to kind of speak into an experience you want somebody to have. But I imagine I too am not yet a host, but my assumption is that probably a lot of you are your spaces are discovered because somebody is looking to stay in a certain geographical area in this section of Beaverton or that section of Portland. And so the primary way that you're going to pop up is, through your ratings, and the way you're going to stand out is through your photography. So if text on the photo is helping with your SEO efforts, then I'd say keep it up. But otherwise, probably less is more, and the more you can tell a story with just the photos is probably best practice.
Can I offer a different perspective really quickly?
Yes, please.
And it's also that I think there's a reason that guests come to Airbnb versus Marriott. The folks who go to the Marriotts and the Four Points and all of those, they want a consistent experience that is, let's face it, kind of cookie cutter. The beauty of Airbnb is that it's different every time, and that sometimes you actually get to know the hosts. It totally depends on the host, of course, but Joel, you are a unique human. There is nobody on the planet like you. And if staying at your properties is a unique experience partly because they are yours, then I say express your personality in whichever way is most suitable to attracting the kind of audience that you want in your space. And if you make, I don't know, a dad joke or something in your description and somebody rolls their eyes and doesn't want to stay there, then I don't know, maybe you just dodged a bullet.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that.
Here. I love that perspective. That's so true.
Yeah. I often tell hosts, like, let your guest feedback inform not only the photos that you take or the photographer takes, but it could inform your captions as well. Your guest feedback from your listing may just tell you exactly what you're missing in photos, or what you should highlight in photos, or what you can caption in photos. And I know, because it's something I struggle with, and I know what other hosts struggle with captions on anything, it may be sitting in your feedback for all we know. And
True.
that may reflect, like you said, it may reflect your personality from feedback that your guests are giving you. So I love that, Amina. Thanks for that perspective.
Thank you.
I was curious about something that I've struggled with regards to overhead lighting, and whether or not to use it. Is that really space dependent? Like, if a space is broadly lit, then don't use the overhead lights in general? Is there a rule that people can follow? Or like, is it, you should always shoot in the middle of the day when the sun is at its brightest? Like, are there any tools folks can use to help them know when is the best time of day and whether or not to use that overhead lighting?
Definitely space dependent. I'm curious Jared and Amina's take on this too. My personal preference, I will err towards natural light as much as possible. But if a space is too dark to really showcase a natural light, I'll go flip on all the lights as much as possible, just to illuminate the space. I would venture to say that Jared maybe does something similar. What's your take, Jared?
Yeah, I do think that it's space dependent. If a big feature is, like, for example, a giant window with a view, I would say,
Yeah,
let that natural light come in. Ideally, you're shooting on a really good day. It's funny, as photographers, we actually really like cloudy days because it's fluorescent.
yeah.
It bounces light everywhere and makes everything very even. But of course, in the dead of winter, even a bright cloudy day, there's going to be shadows cast in different areas. You might need a supplement with either a flash, that high dynamic range, photography, bracketing, or just adding more light to the space. I do real estate, or I do Airbnb photography, but that stems from my skills in real estate photography. And in real estate photography, our editors, we prefer every light on that we can possibly turn on. If there's a light underneath the, over the stove, we're going to do it. If there's any sort of feature light, we're going to do it because we want that to be highlighted. But also the editing style that we do will eliminate, for the most part, it'll eliminate if it's too yellow. We're going to try to brighten it up, and that's because we're trying to sell the house. We're trying to sell the space and bring people in. With Airbnb, it's a little bit different. A raw real estate photo with all of its kind of hyper saturated and like overly bright tones may actually feel more sterile, may feel less lived in, and again goes back to telling that story. So I think if you need it, err on the side of using it. But if the feature of the space is natural light, then show it off.
And then from the total like newbie perspective, but how important is it to have similar light tones? Because I just moved into a condo and I had to buy new light fixtures, and this was something like I basically had to buy all new light fixtures, and so I was like, okay, am I going to go with something bright in the kitchen, something warmer in the living room, and something really, really light, really low lumens in the bedroom? Like, how does that impact your photography, or like the way things look after you take them?
I think the biggest,
take that.
Oh yeah, I think you should.
I know you had an experience recently with light stuff.
Who, me?
Yeah. Did you mention you just got?
Anytime I have a chance to vent about mixed lighting, I will. I
Please
can't
do.
stand when like there's a really, really warm incandescent bulb on one side of the room, and then on the other side of the room, it's like the sterile green. I can see Peg nodding emphatically.
Yeah.
It just drives me nuts. Not as a photographer, just as a human. I cannot handle it. There are, however, some instances where having mixed lighting can actually look really good. And I actually pulled up an image that I shot this. This is in our backyard. This is an Airbnb photo of our unit, and I actually chose to shoot this at dusk, so that first of all the interior lighting would glow, because in the middle of the day it wouldn't, because it'd be too bright outside. But also at dusk, the lighting becomes increasingly blue. And so now what that does is, in contrast, it makes the interior lights look even more golden. And by the way, as a total side note, if you look really, really closely, you'll see that there's a tiger on the bed through one of those windows. That is my partner's doing, because he's a little weirdo, and we are letting our freak flag fly even on Airbnb. And if you don't like tigers on your beds, then you probably shouldn't stay with us.
Oh my gosh.
But
That was a fun little
however-
Easter egg.
Yeah.
But however, the rest of these photos were shot during the day. And so we ended up doing 2 shoots and leveraging lighting for different things. So the exteriors were shot at dusk, but the interiors were shot during the day. And we did leave the interior lights on. It makes it a little bit of a challenge, though, because if the interior lights are all yellow, but all of the light coming in from outside is a little bit bluer, because even in midday, when the lighting is when it's bright outside, it's still bluer than a typical incandescent bulb inside. And so you still have to contend with that a little bit. And phones aren't great at that. Even professional cameras aren't great at that. Yeah. And it takes some post-processing. It needs, you kind of need to know what you're doing, either, on your phone as you're editing, or if you're using a professional product like Photoshop, to get that balance just right. Because here's the other thing. This is another little soapbox thing, is that a lot of the things we're talking about here are really subtle. Color temperature. Carlos, earlier on, you were talking about, well, I think all 3 of us touched on the whole standing up versus crouching down and the lines and stuff like that. These are all really subconscious things that no guest browsing on Airbnb is going to say consciously to themselves, ooh, those lines are crooked, those walls are in a V shape. But it all adds up to how they feel about the space. That's one thing. And the second thing is that, our brains and our eyeballs are actually way more sophisticated than any camera that exists. And so our brains do an amazing amount of processing. So when we walk into a room, like even right now, there's a little bit of blue coming in my window, because it's, the days are getting longer finally. There's a little blue coming in here, and I have a Philips Hue, so I have daylight colored bulbs to compensate for that. But if they were yellow, my eyes, they don't necessarily see those color differences, because our brains are so good at balancing these things out. But no camera is as good as our brains are. And so the more effort we take and make to making our photos feel more like our brains are going to interpret the space, the more representative our listings are for when the guests arrive. And that's why maybe we should have started this at the top of the hour, is that that's why this is so important. It's not just, a bunch of professional photographers talking about nitpicking little things. It really can be the difference between somebody booking and not.
Like there's definitely a psychological aspect that I'm not a psychologist, can't speak to it, but for sure, if we are seeing a space where just the color clashing, could be a great space, but if the color clash happens, it might affect my mood or emotion or how I react to that space.
Yeah.
Oh, Joel, I think you might want to. Sorry.
Yeah.
Pardon me. I'm
all good.
Sequence of events. Quick question. Is there any circumstance where a drone photo is highly desirable?
I can speak to that.
Go for it.
Go. You go first, Carlos.
There's a couple of situations. I'll screen share real quick and then be very, very, very brief, hopefully. if your location has a spot that merits it, I think it'd be awesome to have it. Here's a couple. Like this house right here really wants to show that when you walk around the neighborhood, you can see, the mountain range near Bend and Sisters, that they're nearby a lake. Other times, a drone photo like this one is merely to inform folks that you're right by a highway, and that wasn't displayed before. Now, in addition to being by highway, you're also a short walk 2 blocks from the beach, but this is also to inform them you're not beachfront. So from the ground, you may not be able to tell that you're not beachfront, but guests would get there and complain. Number one, this is what the host was mentioning, that hey, we didn't tell from the photos that we were right by the highway, that's not as comfortable. Or, hey, we didn't realize it wasn't beachfront because you included photos of the beach, but not how close we are. So from the air, you can tell a little bit better of how close you are. So I think if the location merits it, or if you're trying to show something specifically that's worth showing off, I think it'd be really helpful.
Thank you.
Carlos, that was excellent. Yeah, I will. I mean, if I were to add anything, it would be, sorry. If I were to add anything, it would be the same. Like if it helps, this was kind of an extra shot, not necessarily the best. This actually wasn't my example. This was. So the house is located in the center of the photo, but one of the things that these hosts wanted to emphasize was that in the backyard, there's just trees. Even though you're in the middle of the suburbs, there's trees for at least a mile. And so they wanted to really show off that, hey, this little backyard space, it's not just a little backyard space, it's actually connecting you straight to nature. There's like there's like a woods back here and like a park that you can go to. And so yeah, if it shows it off as a feature, I think it's really good. But Carlos, you broke that down perfectly about why you may not want to, or if you want to show that it's beachfront, then you definitely want to,
Does that help a little bit, Joel?
Okay, yeah, that helps. And I've got to run because frankly, my relationship with my spouse is more important than anything I'm learning here.
Thanks for joining us, Joel.
Thank you.
So you folks mentioned post-processing, which just for someone who's not a photographer or doesn't have that training might sound like intimidating, or they don't know where to start for that. Are there any basically apps or iPhone tricks or anything that the average user might be able to work with to help improve the way that their photos look after taking them?
I think you had a point you wanted to share at some point about like built-in photo editors, right?
I did, yeah. And I'm gonna see.
I'm looking on my phone too.
Whether Zoom lets me do this. So hang on a second. Let me see if I can share my phone screen. Can you see my phone? Oh, wait a second. It says I need to tap this and that. We'll see if it lets me do this. Can you see my? Oh, yeah. So you can see. Okay, but what do you see? You just see an image, right? You don't actually see my phone interface. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, let me see if. Oh, but now you can see it. Okay. So here's our Zoom call. And here you all are on my screen. So what I wanted to show you is that there's actually now, this is an iPhone, so this isn't every phone, but I wanted to show you something that I discovered recently that exists that didn't always. So if you go into the crop button, so first of all, if I shot this crooked, which is really easy to do with any kind of camera, if you're me, then first of all, you can straighten it. But do you see how the my external monitor on the right side, it's doing that V shape that we talked about, because I intentionally shot it from above to create that V. Well, there's now a perspective correction button.
Whoa.
That lets you straighten this stuff. And now if it's really crooked, like if it's really V'd, then the perspective correction is going to make a lot of other things look wonky. So you only want to do this if you're just a little bit off. But look how much straighter that is. right? And so, and in fact, I probably went a little bit too far. And if I go like this, and then I go back to straighten, and then I rotate it left just a little bit, then I can get that screen to be almost perfect. But you can also see how much of the image I'm losing, right? You can't see my keyboard anymore, right? And so it crops it in a lot when you do that. So there's upside to getting it right when you're shooting, so that you don't have to, as we call it in the industry, fix it in post. Just do it right in the first place, and you'll have a lot less work afterwards. But I did also want to share that, you know, these phones, they have such great filters already that you can just choose different presets, and it kind of edits itself, but then you can go and do adjust, like individual adjustments. And the ones that are going to be the most popularly used are things like exposure. And usually phones have auto exposure, so it's mostly going to get it right for you. Pardon?
Fast. Sorry. How are you? Good.
I think we might need to
Dinner. How's
go on
Pulse
mute.
going at your house?
Hey, I think, oh, let's see, Laura, I'm gonna mute you. Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. So exposure is probably going to be one of the more commonly used ones to either brighten or darken your image. And then the other one is contrast. A lot of times phones will kind of give you a flat looking image. Sometimes you might want to reduce contrast if you know, that's the whole high dynamic range HDR thing that we were talking about. But most of the time, if you don't have a window in your background, you're going to want to increase your contrast a little bit, and it's going to make the colors pop a little bit more. That's about it. But I did want to show you that straightening and that perspective correction tool, because when I saw that, that kind of blew my mind there. So I'm going to hit done, and now I have a whole new image.
Very cool.
There we go.
Yeah, no, I love that. Anybody else use anything post-processing that you would recommend?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that's a great tool. It's honestly amazing over the years, the iPhone. And I mean, if you, we can, most of us can really speak to the iPhone, but the editing features just within photo, like just within the pictures that you've already taken, there's some great tools in there. I personally have always loved, it's called VSCO, VSCO. And it all started really with filters. And this was like back in the Instagram nerd days where we were running around forests and jumping off logs and stuff. But but it still has its place, especially with a lot of those perspective tools. And then there are some apps that can like help you blot out things. But really, this is where preparing in advance is always the best. Prepare in advance, take multiple shots, pick your best ones. Don't rely on one or two images, but if you need to, you know, take as many as you need and then pick the best ones to kind of save you on the post process or the, you know, fixing it in post. Yeah, I'd say any photo editor is probably going to do well, but I know that VSCO has been very good to me over the years, and I still use it for pretty much anything. The iPhone is really good. It's really powerful. You know, the different tools that are in there, it's really a matter of, I think, understanding the specific tools. Like if you're adding contrast, what is that doing? If you're pulling shadows, what is that doing? If you're crunching the highlights, bringing those down or accelerating them, what does that do? A big turn in my personal editing story over the past, you know, decade plus of doing photography is when I understood how to use temperature and tint to really make consistent photos. So like whether if something was too warm, how to cool it down, but then to make sure that things didn't look too green or too magenta. Those are kind of like the two opposites. So those will really help you get consistent colors. I'm not sure if there's a copy paste within iPhone's editor, but I know that in VSCO, it does have, you can easily copy and paste to different images. I think if you are editing any image, it's better not to just, you can maybe create a base edit on one that you want to make sure is really the standout. Copy and paste all the other photos so you have like the same color and tint. But then definitely spend time on each photo just to make sure if you need to adjust the shadows or the brightness or contrast, that all makes sense for that photo. But because you copied and paste from that first one, it all looks pretty consistent.
Jared, are you saying copy and paste the photos or copy and paste the settings from one photo to apply them to the other photos?
Yes, copy and pasting the settings. Yeah, specifically in VSCO. I don't know if the iPhone feature that you just showed
I don't
has
know.
that.
I'm gonna have to look
I've
into
never
that because that
tried.
would save a lot of time.
I know, wouldn't it? That's one of the
It
reasons why I
does.
like VSCO is that
It
it
does?
also holds everything.
Wait, like
I'm
It's
hoping
go
the
recent.
through
built-in
It's
VSCO?
recent.
Cupertino or
It's recent, but the built-in iPhone, and I don't know Android, but I'm almost positive that Android, the built-in Android app that edits photos would as well.
Amazing. That's such a
So
time saver. And you know
it
what,
is,
actually,
yeah.
Jared, the other point that you just made about color temperature, I totally forgot to mention that when I was editing on my phone and screen sharing. That's another really commonly used setting is, like you said, the warmth, the yellow to blue, and then the tint from, because anytime you have foliage outside, that's going to cast a whole green grossness on your room. And if you can just dial that back by dialing in a little bit more magenta, and you can do that right on your phone. It's amazing.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's also features. I actually don't have it on my phone anymore because I just don't use it. But in the early days, I used Snapseed, and one of the features that I really like, I think it's a Google product. But it had the ability, like, let's say I'm thinking of the bedroom example that Carlos had where he had flash and like that composite image, and afterwards he got rid of all the green. Let's say you did that on your phone, the green's coming in, you've adjusted it to look more white, like you want to get that wall to look white and not have the the green hue, so you combated it with magenta. But then the green outside now looks weird and brown or gold. But on Snapseed, you can highlight that specific object, try to highlight the specific color in that region. You expand it, and then you can mess around and add the green back. You can be a wizard. It's amazing what some of these tools can do. It does take some, time spent with the app and trial and error. But there's a lot of different on-phone features that you can use that can, help you fix things like that.
Snapseed is called, right?
Yeah, Snapseed.
Should try to
I think they
find
still
a
make
link
it.
for
I
You
think
might
it's still
also-
around.
One thing I found to be user-friendly here lately, I use it for a lot of the marketing materials that come out of Host to Host, is a program called Canva, Canva. And they do have, if you upload a photo to their, you can do all the manipulation. But there's also just like a magic button, which I love because it just keeps it simple. So you can just hit the magic button and it'll do the adjustments based on kind of what it thinks should happen to the photo. If you're overwhelmed with other choices. So that's something to consider. It is a free app as well. And all these other ones that you're mentioning, Snapseed and all of these, VSCO, are these all free services? Or are they paid services? Do you know?
The base features usually are like VSCO. There's a free version. There's some more advanced features and filters that they block you out of if you don't pay for it. But you pretty much open VSCO entirely for like $20 a year. And then Snapseed, I think, is free.
Great. Totally reasonable. Yeah.
Yeah. And I put the links in there too for both Apple and Android.
Cool. I'll make sure to include the chat when I am putting things out tomorrow so that you guys can have reference to this, can refer back to it, and watch it on YouTube. So it looks like we are just wrapping up. I want to thank our panel today. Amina, Carlos, and Jared, thank you so much. So informative. I feel like I want to just go out and take pictures of my new condo now, really. I'm not even hosting. I just want to practice because you guys have empowered us to at least have a better take on how things are going. And just as a reminder, Host to Host is a nonprofit trade association that is powered with your help. So there's lots of ways to get involved, to become a member of the organization. You can join a committee. We have an advocacy committee, a community committee, and an education committee. And would love to see your folks contributing to that if you would like to. And it's a lot of fun. So thanks, everybody. I appreciate you taking some time to be with us today and to learn more about how you can take better photos. Thank you.